The View has seen its fair share of heated arguments, celebrity meltdowns, and unscripted fireworks. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared the audience for what went down when Hollywood tough guy Mark Wahlberg took the hot seat. What started as a routine promotional interview spiraled into a live television showdown so raw, so volatile, it left millions of viewers stunned. The studio in chaos, and producers scrambling to cut to commercial. In the middle of it all, Joy Behar wielding her razor-sharp tongue like a weapon, and Wahlberg refusing to back down, his jaw clenched, his Boston bravado turned up to 10. What followed wasn't just an interview gone wrong, it was a public clash that made daytime TV history. And by the end, one of Hollywood's biggest stars found himself walked off the stage, humiliated, furious, and vowing never to return. The sparks flew from the very first question. Joy, never one to hold back, jabbed Wahlberg with a remark about his controversial past, her tone dripping with sarcasm. The crowd tensed, cameras zoomed in. Wahlberg smirked, trying to play it cool, but his eyes told a different story. He wasn't about to let Joy control the narrative. You think you know me, Joy? He fired back, his voice steady but loaded with menace. Gasps erupted from the audience. It was no longer an interview. It was a battle, live on national television, with reputations on the line and no safety net in sight. The tension thickened as co-hosts tried to intervene, their voices overlapping in a desperate attempt to calm the storm. But Wahlberg leaned forward, locking eyes with Joy like a fighter in the ring. Every sentence became a punch, every retort a counterpunch. Joy's wit was quick, biting, relentless. Wahlberg's responses dripped with defiance, daring her to push harder. The live audience was electrified, half cheering, half booing, the studio trembling with energy. Producers whispered frantically in headsets, unsure whether to let the drama play out or pull the plug. And yet, the cameras kept rolling, capturing every raw second of the escalating feud. The breaking point came when Joy, her patience snapped, called him out directly. You can play the tough guy in your movies, Mark, but here, you don't intimidate me. The crowd roared, the other hosts froze, and Wahlberg's smile finally cracked into pure anger. His voice thundered back, louder than the applause. Lady, you don't know tough until you've dealt with me. Suddenly, this wasn't just banter, it was a full-on clash of egos, with the world watching. And at that moment, it became clear, something was about to break, and it wouldn't be pretty. The energy in the studio was volcanic, the kind of raw, unpredictable chaos that no producer dares dream of, but every tabloid craves. Mark Wahlberg sat rigid, muscles tense beneath his crisp jacket, the veins in his neck pulsing as Joy Behar doubled down. She wasn't just pushing his buttons, she was hammering them, one after another, as if daring him to snap live on air. You think Hollywood forgives everything, she said, her voice slicing through the noise like glass. But accountability doesn't vanish just because you flex at the box office. The words hung heavy in the air. The audience leaned forward, breathless. The studio lights felt hotter, harsher, exposing every twitch, every flicker of rage on Wahlberg's face. Mark leaned into the microphone, his Boston accent sharpening with every syllable. You sit here, passing judgment like you've lived my life, he growled, his voice low but dangerous. But you don't know me, Joy. You don't know a damn thing. Gasps and nervous laughter rippled through the audience. The co-hosts glanced at each other, panicked, their smiles frozen in place, unsure if they should intervene or let the storm rage on. But Joy, she thrived in the fire. She grinned a bold, defiant grin as if she'd just cornered a prizefighter who had nowhere to run. The tension became unbearable when Joy leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and fired the line that detonated the powder keg. Mark, maybe you're just proving what we've all suspected: you can act tough in movies. But in real life, maybe it's all an act. The crowd exploded with gasps and cheers, some chanting Joy's name, others booing, feeding the chaos like fuel on flames. Wahlberg shot to his feet, towering over the table, his chair crashing backward with a deafening thud. His voice boomed across the studio, "Say that again to my face. I dare you." The audience went wild, screaming, clapping, shouting over each other. The camera operators scrambled to keep up, zooming in and out like it was a prize fight on pay-per-view. Joy, never flinching, raised her chin and repeated it, louder this time, each word enunciated like a strike. It's all an act. The sound of the crowd reached a fever pitch, drowning out the frantic producers yelling for a commercial break. One of the co-hosts timidly tried to insert a joke, but their voice was lost in the hurricane of noise. And then came the moment that would play on repeat across social media within minutes. Wahlberg leaned across the table, his face inches from Joy's, his hands gripping the edge like he was holding himself back from an explosion. The cameras captured every bead of sweat, every flicker of rage in his eyes. Joy met his glare without a blink, her smirk daring him to cross the line. It wasn't just television anymore, it was gladiatorial combat, and the audience knew they were witnessing something historic. The studio had transformed into a coliseum, the roar of the audience echoing like an unruly mob, feeding on the raw spectacle before them. Mark Wahlberg, chest heaving, stood like a prizefighter on the verge of swinging. His jaw locked, fists clenched, and eyes burning with a fury that daytime television rarely dares to capture. Across the table, Joy Behar sat steady, cool as ice, her smirk widening like a matador taunting the bull. She knew exactly what she was doing, drawing out every ounce of rage, pulling the Hollywood tough guy into a trap he couldn't escape, and the crowd loved every second of it. The co-hosts tried to salvage the wreckage, voices tripping over each other in a desperate plea to calm the storm. "Let's all just take a breath," one began, only to be drowned out by Joy's biting retort. "No, let him talk. Let America hear the real Mark Wahlberg." The studio audience erupted in applause, a chant breaking out from the back rows. "Joy, Joy, Joy." Wahlberg's face turned redder with each beat of the chant, his lips pressed into a line so tight, it looked like steel. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a growl that carried more menace than shouting ever could. "You don't get to define me," he hissed. "You sit here, protected by cameras, by this studio, by your audience. Out there in the real world, Joy, you wouldn't last a second against me." His words, heavy and dangerous, sliced through the noise, silencing the crowd for just a heartbeat. Gasps filled the gap, followed by a thunder of whispers, the audience processing the threat that had just been hurled across live television. But Joy was unfazed. She leaned in, her voice cutting sharp and clear. "And there it is, folks. The mask slipping, the tough guy act collapsing. You hear that, America? That's not confidence, that's fear." The crowd detonated again, half booing, half cheering, the volume rattling the studio walls. Wahlberg's chair, still overturned on the floor, lay like a casualty of war, a silent reminder of how far off the rails this interview had spun. The control room was in meltdown. Producers shouted into headsets, debating whether to cut to commercial. But the director, sensing ratings gold, barked to keep the cameras rolling. Every second was explosive, every glare and insult a headline in the making. Wahlberg's breathing grew heavier, his chest rising and falling as though he were standing in a boxing ring, ready to strike. Joy, unflinching, adjusted her glasses and stared him down, her expression daring him to take the final step into disaster. And then, in a move that sent the audience into hysterics, Wahlberg slammed his palm onto the table so hard the mugs and cue cards rattled, the sound echoing. Like a gunshot, the crowd screamed, the co-hosts jumped, and Joy only smiled wider, as if she had just won the round. It was live TV pandemonium, messy, raw, unfiltered, and for Mark Wahlberg, the walls were closing in fast. The stage had become a battlefield, and the audience could sense that the clash wasn't just about words anymore, it was about pride, ego, and dominance. Mark Wahlberg's palm still pressed against the table, his body looming over the co-hosts like a storm cloud ready to break. The crowd fed on the tension, their cheers and jeers crashing against each other in waves. Joy Behar, still seated, folded her arms and leaned back, her smile radiating defiance, as if to say, "Is that all you've got?" Her calmness was gasoline on the fire, and everyone in the room knew Wahlberg was seconds away from losing every ounce of control. "America's watching," Joy said slowly, her words deliberate, slicing through the chaos. "You think this makes you look strong? It makes you look small." The audience gasped as if the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Wahlberg's face twisted with fury, his jaw grinding so hard you could almost hear his teeth clench. He paced behind his chair, every step sharp and heavy, the sound of his shoes clicking against the floor like a ticking time bomb. The co-hosts scrambled to intervene, their voices high and shaky. "Let's keep it civil, please. Mark, Joy, this isn't the place." But it was too late. The confrontation had swallowed the entire set, and the two combatants were locked. In a duel of wills with no exit, Wahlberg stopped mid-step, turned sharply, and jabbed a finger toward Joy. His voice cracked with intensity, every syllable bursting with fury. "You've made a career out of running your mouth, tearing people down, pretending to be brave, but deep down, you're just a coward hiding behind cameras." The audience erupted, half booing, half cheering, turning the studio into a riotous arena. Phones whipped out from every direction, capturing the meltdown as producers screamed into earpieces for security to be ready. Joy, unbothered, tilted her head, raised her eyebrows, and fired back with venom. "A coward. Mark, look at you, red in the face, veins bulging, about to explode over a few questions. If anyone's exposing themselves as weak, it's you. I don't need muscles or a movie set. I've got the truth, and that's what terrifies you." The words hit like a hammer. Wahlberg lunged forward, both fists slamming the table this time, the sound so loud the microphones crackled with feedback. Cups toppled, papers scattered, and one co-host visibly flinched in fear. The audience screamed in disbelief, the chaos reaching a crescendo that seemed unstoppable. Wahlberg's voice boomed over it all. "You're done disrespecting me, done." And yet, Joy didn't flinch. She leaned forward now, finally rising from her chair, meeting him at eye level. Her voice, calm but sharp as a blade, cut through his thunder If you can't handle questions, Mark, maybe you shouldn't be here at all. The studio fell into a split-second silence. Silence that spoke louder than any insult and then erupted again. The audience exploding with chants. The air charged with the sense that the confrontation was about to reach its breaking point. The silence after Joy's words lasted only a heartbeat, but it was a silence so sharp it felt like glass shattering in slow motion. Mark Wahlberg's nostrils flared, his fists trembling against the table, his eyes narrowing into daggers aimed directly at Joy Behar. He wasn't just angry, he was humiliated. And for a man whose Hollywood image had been built on toughness, humiliation was the one thing he couldn't swallow. The audience sensed it. They weren't just watching an interview anymore. They were witnessing a man pushed to the edge, live on national television, with no way to claw his way back. Joy straightened to her, full height, her chair pushed aside, her posture radiating control. She was no longer seated prey to Wahlberg's looming presence. She was the challenger, standing toe-to-toe, daring him to take one more step. The studio audience screamed louder, some chanting Joy's name, others egging Wahlberg on with shouts of "Don't let her win." The tension wasn't just on set anymore. It had spilled into the crowd, splitting them like rival factions in an arena. Wahlberg's voice, hoarse but thundering, broke through the uproar. "You think this is your show? You think you get to humiliate me? I came here to talk about my work, not to be ambushed by you and your cheap shots." He jabbed a finger at Joy again, his voice rising with every word. "You've disrespected me, you've disrespected my family, and you've crossed the line." The co-hosts panicked, their voices tripping over one another. Mark, please, calm down. Joy, let's just." But it was like trying to stop a freight train with bare hands. Joy's face, however, showed no fear. She tilted her head, eyes locked on his, and delivered the line that detonated the studio. "If you can't handle being asked about your past, maybe it's because you're still ashamed of it." The audience screamed in disbelief, some gasping so loudly it echoed through the microphones. Wahlberg's face went crimson, and for the first time, his composure shattered completely. He shoved the table forward with a violent lurch, sending mugs flying, water spilling across cue cards, and the entire set rattling like an earthquake had hit. The crowd exploded in chaos, screams and cheers clashing in a deafening wall of sound. Security rushed forward, but Wahlberg raised a hand, signaling them to back off, his chest heaving like a fighter about to throw the first punch. Joy, refusing to step back, jabbed her finger toward him with the same ferocity he had aimed at her. "Go ahead, Mark. Show America exactly who you are," she shouted, her voice cutting like lightning through the storm. The control room teetered. On collapse, producers shouting, cut to commercial, but the director held steady, knowing this was live television, gold. Wahlberg's lips curled into a snarl, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table, teetering on the precipice of total self-destruction. The audience was no longer just watching, they were on their feet, screaming, living every second of the carnage as though it were a heavyweight title fight. And in that chaos, as Joy stood unflinching and Wahlberg teetered on the brink, one thing became clear. Somebody was going to break, and the world would never forget it. The set of The View was now unrecognizable. What had started as an interview was now a live battleground, every inch of the studio buzzing with hysteria. Mark Wahlberg, flushed with rage, stood center stage like a gladiator on the verge of striking, while Joy Behar stood across from him, her stance unyielding, her face a mask of daring defiance. The table between them had become collateral damage coffee, dripping off the edge, cue cards floating across the floor like confetti. Mugs shattered into fragments of glass that sparkled under the stage lights. The audience was standing now, their cheers and jeers blending into a chaotic roar that shook the walls. Half of them screamed Wahlberg's name, egging him on as if he were about to throw a knockout punch, while the other half rallied behind Joy, chanting her name with the fervor of a rally. It was no longer a talk show, it was a live televised war, and the entire nation was watching. Security had moved in closer, big men in dark suits, their hands twitching near their earpieces, waiting for the signal to intervene. Producers in the control booth were in meltdown, some screaming to cut away, others shouting to let it roll. The director's voice cut through. "Keep it on them. Do not cut." It was the kind of once-in-a-decade live disaster that networks dream about, the kind that guarantees headlines, viral clips, and endless replay value. Wahlberg's voice ripped through the chaos like thunder. "You don't humiliate me, Joy. You don't get to sit there and tear me down like I'm some joke." His chest heaved as he jabbed a finger toward her again, his Boston accent growing thicker with every word. The cameras caught every flicker of fury on his face, every bead of sweat glistening on his forehead. "You think you're tough. You're nothing but a bully with a microphone." Joy's eyes gleamed, unflinching. She leaned forward, her words sharp, deliberate, each one meant to cut deeper than the last. And you're proving, right here, right now, that everything people whisper about you is true. You can't handle pressure. You can't handle the truth. You can't handle me. The studio detonated. The audience shrieked, some standing on their chairs to get a better view. Phones recording every moment that would soon flood TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Wahlberg roared, slamming his fists onto the table so hard that one of the microphones went dead. Sparks flew from the feedback, the sound reverberating like an explosion. One co-host screamed, clutching her notes as they flew off the table. Another tried to calm Wahlberg by touching his arm, only for him to jerk away violently. Eyes still locked on Joy, and then came the moment that sealed this disaster into legend. Wahlberg leaned across the wreckage of the table, inches from Joy's face, his voice breaking into a guttural roar. I don't need this show. I don't need you, and I'll walk off right now, if I have to. The words echoed across the studio, feeding into the pandemonium. Joy didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, she leaned closer, her smirk twisting into the sharpest dagger yet. Then go, Mark. Walk off. Show the world what kind of man you really are. The audience screamed so loud it rattled the stage lights, and in that instant, the fate of the showdown teetered on the edge of collapse. The studio air had turned heavy, almost suffocating, every second dragging like the final countdown before an explosion. Mark Wahlberg's threat to walk off wasn't just words, it was the hinge on which the entire debacle now swung. The camera zoomed in tight, capturing every tremor of rage in his jaw, every flash of defiance in his eyes. Joy Behar's smirk remained fixed, daring him to follow through, her voice dripping with contempt that poured salt into his already bleeding ego. Then go, she repeated, louder this time, her hand sweeping toward the studio doors like a queen dismissing a subject. The audience howled, half in disbelief, half in triumph, as if they had just witnessed the moment Joy had broken the unbreakable. Wahlberg's fists trembled at his sides, his breathing ragged, chest rising and falling like a man fighting to stay tethered to sanity. For a long tense pause, it looked like he might lunge forward, unleash the fury bottled up inside. Security shifted uneasily, ready to pounce. But instead, Wahlberg shoved his chair aside, the metal legs screeching across the floor in a sound that set teeth on edge. He raised both arms, his voice booming across the studio, drowning out the audience's roar. You think you've won? You think you've embarrassed me? He jabbed a finger at Joy again, the cameras capturing his hand shaking with rage. This whole show is a circus. You're not brave, you're not clever. You're just a bully who hides behind applause. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others booing, their phones shaking in the air as they fought to record every explosive second. Wahlberg turned on his heel, his back to the table now, his face contorted in fury as he stormed toward the edge of the stage. Joy's voice rang out behind him, slicing like a blade. That's right, Mark, run away, just like you always do. The insult hit him like a whip. Wahlberg stopped dead in his tracks, his shoulders tightening, the veins in his neck pulsing like coiled snakes. The audience shrieked, sensing the snap that was about to come. He spun back around, eyes blazing, and marched toward Joy with a fury so intense the co-hosts scrambled out of their seats, chairs clattering in every direction. Joy stood her ground, refusing to back up even an inch, her eyes locked on him, her voice cutting through the chaos like a trumpet call. Go ahead, Mark, lose control. Show them all. The studio was deafening now, every scream from the audience colliding into one massive wall of sound. Wahlberg reached the table, slammed both fists into it with such force the cameras shook, and leaned so close to Joy that the entire nation watching at home could feel the heat radiating from his rage. Don't test me, he growled, his voice, guttural, dangerous, vibrating with suppressed violence. Don't you ever test me. And then came the fatal blow, the moment that would immortalize this disaster in television history. Joy leaned in, so close their foreheads nearly touched, and whispered into the microphone with a venomous calm that cut deeper than any scream. Too late. You already failed. The crowd erupted into madness. Wahlberg's face twisted into something primal, a mixture of fury and humiliation, and the entire set threatened to collapse under the weight of the chaos. The explosion wasn't physical, it was psychological, emotional, and televised, for millions to devour. When Joy Behar whispered those venomous words, too late, you already failed, it was like she had ripped open a wound Wahlberg had been fighting to keep hidden. His face contorted, his jaw trembling, as though every ounce of restraint inside him had just shattered into dust. The audience sensed it instantly. This wasn't acting, this wasn't banter, this was a star being dragged down into the pit, live, raw, unfiltered. Wahlberg slammed the table again, the sound like a gunshot. One of the co-hosts let out a shriek, another threw her arms up in horror. Security surged forward, circling him, but Wahlberg roared over them. Back off. I'm not done. The crowd went insane. their screams reaching fever pitch, the entire room vibrating with hysteria. Camera operators struggled to keep steady as Wahlberg leaned across the table, eyes locked on Joy, every muscle in his body coiled like a predator ready to strike. Joy didn't blink, she didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her microphone and said, loud enough for every corner of the studio and every living room across America, "Mark Wahlberg can't even control himself on a talk show. Imagine what that says about the real man behind the movies." The audience detonated. Some booed, others cheered so hard their voices cracked. Phones waved high in the air as hashtags began forming in real time. Wahlberg's chest heaved, his voice erupting into a roar that drowned the chaos. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through." His accent grew thicker, his words cracking with raw fury. "You think you're exposing me? You think this makes you brave? You're nothing without this table, this audience, these cameras." The co-hosts panicked, tried to salvage control. "Mark, please, this isn't helping," one cried, her voice breaking. But Wahlberg wasn't listening. He couldn't listen. The room was spinning into full-blown anarchy. Security tightened their circle. Producers screamed into their headsets. And yet the director refused to cut, his voice maniacal in the control room. "Don't you dare cut away. This is television history." Joy, seizing her moment, leaned forward, her face only inches from Wahlberg's. Her voice, calm and deliberate, sliced through the hurricane. "You're not angry at me, Mark. You're angry at yourself." The studio imploded. The audience shrieked, some clutching their heads in disbelief. Wahlberg roared back, veins bulging in his temples. His fist slamming the table so hard, a mug shattered into shards that flew across the stage. One shard skittered toward Joy's feet, but she didn't even glance at it. Her eyes stayed locked on him, her smirk unwavering, her words echoing in his head like a curse he couldn't escape. "Enough," Wahlberg bellowed, his voice breaking into raw desperation. "I'm done with this circus. I'm done with you." And with that, he ripped the microphone from his lapel, the wire snapping, the sound system crackling with static. The audience gasped as he tore the mic free and hurled it to the ground, the clatter reverberating like the final bell of a brutal fight. The camera zoomed in on his face, his eyes wild, his body trembling with unspent rage. Joy stood opposite, him unbroken, her expression calm, victorious. And in that moment, it was clear. Mark Wahlberg wasn't just losing the fight, he was losing the entire room. The mic clattered against the floor, the sharp sound ricocheting across the set like a final warning shot. For a moment there was silence, thick, suffocating, unreal. Mark Wahlberg stood heaving, fists clenched at his sides, every muscle in his body twitching with fury. His face was crimson, sweat dripping down his temple. Eyes locked on Joy Behar with the intensity of a man cornered, exposed, and furious at the world for seeing it. The audience held their breath, the collective pause before the storm's last strike. And then Joy broke it. Her voice, calm and icy, cut through the tension like a scalpel. "There he is, America. The real Mark Wahlberg. Not the movie star, not the action hero, just a man unraveling on daytime TV." The silence shattered. The audience erupted into a frenzy so chaotic it sounded like thunder rolling through the studio. Half the crowd jeered, booing Wahlberg with venom. The other half screamed in disbelief, phones thrust into the air to immortalize the breakdown. Social media was already ablaze. Hashtags like #WahlbergMeltdown and #JoyVSMark surged into trending status as millions clipped the confrontation and blasted it across the internet. Wahlberg's chest rose and fell like a man fighting against his own fury. His voice cracked when he finally roared back, "You don't get to define me. You don't get to humiliate me in front of the world." He stepped toward Joy, and instantly, security leaped forward, creating a wall of black suits and earpieces between them. The crowd screamed louder, some chanting, "Let him stay," while others shouted, "Get him out." Joy leaned sideways, peering through the wall of security, her eyes gleaming with victorious fire. "You already humiliated yourself, Mark," she spat, her words amplified by the mic still clipped to her blazer. "You didn't need my help. That was it, the breaking point." Wahlberg lunged forward, trying to push past the guards, his voice erupting in guttural shouts, his words almost incoherent with rage. The studio was chaos, co-hosts crying out, the director yelling into headsets to keep rolling, the audience shrieking as if they were witnessing the fall of an empire. Wahlberg's arm shot forward, pointing at Joy with a trembling finger, his voice cracking as he shouted, "You'll regret this. You'll regret ever bringing me here." The security team held firm, locking him in place, their bodies straining, as Wahlberg resisted, his reputation crumbling with every second that ticked by. The audience watched in stunned disbelief, every eye glued to the spectacle. Every phone capturing the moment Hollywood's invincible tough guy was dragged down to his knees by words alone. And then it happened. Wahlberg broke free just enough. to fling one final insult across the room, his voice raw, guttural, echoing in every corner. "You're nothing, Joy, nothing." The words cracked with pain more than anger, the sound of a man undone. The crowd gasped, booed, cheered, all at once, their voices colliding in pure chaos. Security forced him back, guiding him toward the edge of the set. Joy, still standing tall at the table, didn't move, didn't falter, her smirk frozen like a dagger. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment as Wahlberg was physically escorted away, his face twisted in fury, his voice still raging off mic, his career bleeding out in real time, and for Joy Behar, she stood triumphant, the queen of the battlefield, the woman who had just broken Mark Wahlberg on live television. The studio was in ruins, emotionally, physically, reputationally. Mark Wahlberg's exit was chaos embodied, security dragging him toward the backstage corridors, his voice still booming faintly from somewhere off-set, every syllable echoing with rage and humiliation. The audience roared in disbelief, their screams mingling with laughter, jeers, and frantic chants. It was bedlam, a live TV implosion that no script, no rehearsal, no producer could have ever imagined. Joy Behar stood tall at center stage, one hand resting on the wreckage of the table, the other still gripping her microphone. She didn't need to shout anymore. Her silence, her smirk, her unshaken composure said everything. She had not just won the clash, she had ended it. Around her, the co-hosts scrambled to regain order, their voices shaking, their smiles plastered on like masks trying to cover a nuclear blast. We'll be right back," one stammered, her words drowned out by the still screaming crowd. But the director didn't cut to commercial. No, the cameras stayed rolling, eating up every second of this historic implosion. Clips were already racing across social media at lightning speed, each one tagged with fire emojis. Headlines like "Wahlberg destroyed on The View" and "Joy Behar ends Mark Wahlberg's career live on TV." Every second became a meme, every glare a gif, every insult a viral soundbite. The ratings, analysts would later confirm, skyrocketed higher than The View had seen in years. Backstage, Wahlberg's fury could still be heard, doors slamming, security shouting, his voice cracking with desperation. But on stage, Joy seized the moment. She leaned into her mic and, with a razor's edge in her tone, declared, "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when someone comes here thinking they can intimidate me." The audience erupted, the cheers drowning out everything else. Her words replayed instantly across millions of phones and laptops. She wasn't just victorious, she was immortalized. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, headlines blanketed every tabloid and news feed. Commentators tore apart every second, fans and critics alike debating who went too far, who won, who lost. But one fact was undeniable. Mark Wahlberg's meltdown was burned into pop culture history, a scar on his carefully curated tough guy image that would never heal. Joy Behar, meanwhile, was trending worldwide, hailed as the woman who stood unflinching and dismantled a Hollywood titan with nothing more than her words. By the time the cameras finally cut, the studio looked like the aftermath of a war zone. Papers scattered, mugs shattered, a table nearly split from Wahlberg's pounding fists. But the legend was born, right there, in that chaos, in that unfiltered clash between movie muscle and talk show wit. And as the credits rolled, one truth was undeniable. Daytime television had never seen anything like it, and it may never again. And if you don't want to miss stories like this raw, explosive, and unforgettable, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now to stay with us here on HOA Storysphere.